Welcome to Brown. Welcome to our conversation. I've been watching politics a long time. I don't think I've ever seen an election like this one. The college Democrats and the college Republicans both internally split. College Republicans couldn't agree on which candidate to support. Sharp emails were exchanged. And now both Democrats and Republicans trying to figure out what direction for the party. Where do we go? Who are we? To help us sort this out, I'm delighted to welcome back our graduate, I won't say what class, a recent class of Brown University, David Korn. David is the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones, and if you read it, he's written in it. I guess that's probably all that needs to be said. Award-winning journalist. Oh, I'll plug your book, The Inside Hubris, the inside story of spin, scandal, and the selling of the Iraq War. A familiar face around the Watson Institute and Brown University. He will take it from here. He will help us sort out the future of the Republican Party. Where to, Republicans? He'll introduce our panelists. But before I turn it over to him, I'll note that we are welcoming C-SPAN to our campus. If you feel moved to shout out and denounce someone, by all means feel free, but please do it into the microphone. You can't be heard if you're just talking in general. And of course, it goes without saying, as with all other classes, cell phones off. Welcome to our panelists. David, please take it from here.
Thank you, Jim. We will get to questions at the end, so you can save your shouting for then. And I will have a bias when it comes to questions, to taking questions from students. So fair warning, I want students to rush the mics to ask good questions. I am happy to be here as part of a series we've been doing through this academic year before and after the election, an election that was quite surprising to both winners and losers. And now we're looking ahead towards the future. So I'm going to start with our two panelists and introduce them. And we're going to try to not get too bogged down in the details of the last 4 or 5 news cycles, which were all in the last 3 hours, and look towards ahead. But we will start with that, so we'll get to some of that. But to my right, we have Mercedes Schlapp, who is a Fox News commentator, and I have wrestled with her on, figuratively, not seriously, not literally, on MSNBC.
And with my husband. But
yes,
that's a
and with her
story.
husband. I was going to get to your husband. She's a columnist for the Washington Times and a radio host on Sirius XM Patriot. CPAC 365 is the name of the show. She's also done real work in life. She was, other than just being in the media with me and as a commentator, she was the director of specialty media for President George W. Bush in the White House. And she's a co-founder of Cove Strategies. She is a first-generation Cuban-American who was raised in Miami, Florida. And as she noted, she is married to Matt Schlapp, who is chairman of the American Conservative Union, which is best known for running the annual CPAC convention, which is the annual gathering of conservative advocates and activists, which just a week or two back held its 2017 gathering, which turned into a tremendous Trump fest.
And David Korn was the keynote speaker, but he didn't tell you that.
No, I didn't quite make it. And perhaps the most important thing to know about Matt and Mercedes is that they have 5 daughters. 5 daughters. John Weaver only has 2 children. But he has had probably a longer career in Republican politics. He's now best known as the chief strategist for John Kasich, the Republican governor of Ohio. But for many years, he was associated, and is still associated with John McCain, being a chief strategist for McCain when he ran for president in 2000, and again in 2008, he worked for them. He's also has been involved with campaigns for campaign finance reform and for how you treat prisoners under the Geneva Convention, and he's worked on comprehensive immigration reform. Interestingly, after the 9/11 attacks in New York City, John oversaw the New York City's communication efforts, working with Rudy Giuliani back then. these are two Republicans who could not disagree more at this moment in time on an issue that is maybe foremost set a stage for the future of the Republican Party, which is what to do, what to think about, how to regard now President Donald Trump. So I want to start off with what's happened the last couple of days, the last few weeks. It's only been 6 weeks into this presidency, but there's already a lot to talk about. And if I were to pick up some of the things that at least made news, we could be here all day. But we started off with the president insisting there were 1.5 million people at an inauguration where clearly there weren't up to 1.5 million people, that there were 3 to 5 million people who voted illegally in the last campaign, which is why he did not win majority of the electorate, when no voting expert says anything like that happened. We had the tweets this past weekend accusing Obama of wiretapping him very specifically in Trump Tower. Again, no factual basis for that, and I won't get into the details of FISA surveillance, but really probably not even possible to happen. We've had chaos with the first executive order on the travel ban, or the Muslim travel ban. The more recent one, which signed yesterday, hasn't created that chaos, to be fair. His attorney general has had to recuse himself from what perhaps is the most important controversy of the moment, the Russian-Trump scandal. And his first national security advisor was fired because he lied regarding that. And today we see the House, last day or two, we see the House Republicans release the much ballyhooed legislative effort to repeal and replace Obamacare, something that President Trump has made a centerpiece of his presidency. And within 20 seconds, it has turned into a Republican food fight with conservative Republicans and moderate Republicans both attacking the Ryan bill. Some people are calling it Ryan Care now, or I think it's soon to be called Rhino Care. And it looks, within a day that it's DOA, and it's unclear what the president's approach is going to be, because he was contacting Republicans, asking them to support this legislation. So,
so all in all, not a bad start.
I'm just wondering, Dave. I'm exhausted.
I know. I'm exhausted just thinking about this.
Yeah.
It's not even 6 weeks. So, first question, you wanted Donald Trump to be president. You were a supporter. Is this a good start, not a good start? How do you think about the last 6 weeks?
Well, I think you got to almost divide it into two parts. I think that President Trump ran on a particular vision, and he had his campaign promises, which was that of bringing jobs back to America. So what were the first couple of executive orders he did? He had a lot of deregulation, whether it would be environmental deregulation, on Obamacare deregulation, on the Keystone Pipeline, Dakota Access Pipeline, in bringing jobs back. He met with heads of corporations, with union leaders, brought in moderate Democrats in to talk about different issues important to them. So I think what you're finding with Trump is that he's basically sticking to his agenda of bringing jobs back. With that being said, then you have a lot of the other chaotic factors surrounding the transition of a businessman, someone who has never been a politician, becoming the President of the United States, which is, and I've worked in the Bush administration. Obviously, John, you very familiar in that world as well. The way the transition has gone from transition to governing is you have to have your staff in place. You have to ensure that it's a fine-oiled machine. And I think that when you have, first of all, they're not staffed up. And you saw that with the first executive order. What happened with the second executive order on the temporary ban? You saw, obviously, General Kelly in place, Sessions in place, Tillerson in place, and there was this impact of the fact that they did have a process that made more sense the second time around. So I think it's a lot of growing pains for the Trump administration right now. There's a lot of people in there, in his administration, in his White House, who have never worked in a White House before. And I think that you've seen both the growing pain side of it, but at the same time, I think you see the positive side of it, which is that they're going to he's focused on his agenda. We saw this with the joint session address that the president gave, which shocked conservative and liberal pundits who basically said it was his moment of being presidential and providing a positive vision for America.
But he says it's a finely tuned machine.
I'm not he. I am saying what I'm looking from the outside.
Right. Do you have any concerns, not about whether it's staffed up enough, but about the way he's been reacting and comporting himself, and what seems to be, I think, objectively put, a degree of erratic behavior?
I think he is transforming the presidency because
For good or bad?
You know, it's how you see it. It's in what world that you live in. In the Trump supporter world, the Trump supporters are thrilled that the president is going after the mainstream media. They want him to step it up and go after Democrats and Republicans. I mean, there's two worlds, David. This is where there is this disconnect in America. There is the thinkers, the elites that are appalled by his actions, and then there's the guy who's working in Pennsylvania or in a coal mine that's saying, "Goodness, this guy's fighting for me." And that's where I think that where it lies. It's a lot about this division in America, where we can sit here and answer all these philosophical questions, but the Trump supporter out there is saying, "Go get him, go after the media, be yourself, and don't change Trump."
His approval ratings are at a historic low for an incoming president, though, so the Trump supporters are not yet a majority. How would you look at the last 6 weeks, John, as someone who was very critical of Trump before he was elected and actually, pointed to what you considered to be instability and a lack of familiarity, to be polite, with policy and facts? Last 6 weeks, as you envisioned, worse, better? What do you?
Yeah, well, I think it's what we saw in the campaign, and people who say there's going to be a reset or that he's going to grow into office or he's going to be different in the way he's conducted himself over his lifetime are either fooling themselves or trying to fool the American people, because he's not going to change. Something Mercedes said is accurate, but it concerns me. Yeah, we have two camps. We only have one country. He's the president of the country. It's his responsibility to rise up and try to heal these divisions and bring people together and not play to them. And that's been my major concern about him and his conduct, is that he is unwilling to accept that role, that he is the father of the country, so to speak, right now, at least until he's no longer in that office. He has not risen to that place. As far as the staffing, no, they don't have the proper staff. They don't have enough staff. And the staff they do have, there's hubris and inexperience mixed in with that. But all organizations, whether it's Brown University, Fox News, Mother Jones, they take on the leadership and the characteristics of the person at the top. Same can be said for this White House. It's erratic. It lives in a false state of reality. It's not truthful. It is helping corrode the civic discussion in our country, and I'm very, very concerned about it. I think it's the worst start of a White House in my lifetime. Now, having said that, he's not been involved in government before, so I give him a little bit of a break on that. But he's shown no interest in being curious about policy, about growing in the office. And I've got grave concerns about what's going to happen when we face a real crisis, be it national security or domestic.
You've been around politicians a long time, as you have too. There's always a certain degree of spin, of trying to create a narrative to your benefit, of putting your best foot forward. And there's a certain a certain sort of acceptability for that in politics and even within government. We had Kellyanne Conway talk about alternative facts, and you had Sean Spicer having to come out to the podium several times to defend a presidential remark that experts, I'm not sure what Trump voters had to say about it, but experts and others said were just completely untrue. Do you think that this administration, as we've seen so far, is pushing the envelope, breaking the envelope, setting new land speed records in terms of not being honest or having a different attitude or approach towards responsible discourse.
Of course. I mean, look, if one of my clients asked me to go out and lie to the press or to the public, I would resign. And I think Mercedes would do that as well. That's what's so befuddling about this. I know some of the people working in the White House, so I'm questioning why they continue to go down this road. The president owes it to all the Americans, but especially the people that voted for him, to tell them the truth. Not tell them what they want to believe or what he wants them to believe, but what the truth is. That's only how we're going to come together as a country to solve the problems that are facing us. And to continue to try to divide us based on some false narrative that appeared on a website or worse is morally wrong.
Well, and I think the sense on the Republican side is that when during the election, this feeling was that the Democrats were trying to divide us by identity and by gender and by sex, and it was a narrative and a messaging that they pushed through, especially in these Rust Belt states. That didn't work. It didn't sell to the American people because those particular battleground states, they were looking for, how are you going to solve my economic problem? How am I going to get more money, or how can I get better wages, or how can I get a better job, because our communities are dying. And so I think Trump spoke to that, where I think the sense with the Democrats during the election in Hillary Clinton's campaign was the fact that it was this same message that they pushed nationally on this divisive identity politics, which I think hurt them at the end, and where Trump was able to sell a very simple economic message to the American people.
Well, I think we have to stipulate that this was a very, very close election. He won the couple of Rust Belt states by a small margin, which gave him an electoral college victory, but if all the people voted, most people did not accept his vision. So in terms of what the American people want or don't want, I don't think we can make bold generalizations based on these results. Yes, he won with that message in those states, and that worked there to a limited degree, but to enough of a degree. But I just wonder, after listening to John, if you think President Trump has any, and the White House has any credibility problem or any problem with truth or truthiness, as Steve Colbert would say.
I find that they can get away from those little. I think that President Trump, and for his team that has having to defend him, it gets complicated, because he might see things in a certain way that might not make sense to the rest of us, and so, or it might be, like you were saying, not accurate. And so the question becomes, when you look at the bigger picture of what he's trying to sell in terms of his relationships that he's building in Congress, much better than what President Obama has done, in terms of working on the bigger pictures of repealing Obamacare, tax reform, school choice, he could be such an effective president. But it's when he gets boggled down in these details, it's always like, who's going to take the Twitter away from President Trump? And whoever can successfully do that should get paid like millions of dollars.
Well,
so John, if you're looking for that job,
I'm not.
I don't think so. You're being very generous, I think, but I'll leave it at that. So, if you
one point on this. He didn't have a mandate. Now, presidents who come in before, having lost the popular vote or in a very narrow election, they've gone out of their way to start building public support. Your boss did that.
Right.
You know, he lost the popular vote and famously contested election. Richard Nixon in 1968 tried to move to the middle and unite people. President Kennedy, in a very close election, tried to broaden his appeal. That's what concerns me about this president.
Well, but stop right there, John. You didn't mention President Obama, which you know for a fact
It wasn't a close election.
failed to have the relationship with like a Speaker Boehner and Senator Mitch McConnell. The fact that their legislative shop barely reached out to Republicans while he was
I agree with all of that. I'm talking about people who a very close election.
Yes,
Unfortunately, President Obama won 2 landslides.
But here's the deal. But who was in charge of the House of Representatives? Who was in charge of the Senate? It was the Republicans. And you
Most
could not get back, you couldn't get past the gridlock. And so I think the American people, I'm not going to generalize so that David doesn't get mad at me again. Those people, those voters out there who felt that their voices weren't heard during the Obama administration, where they felt that they were being dictated from Washington how they have to think, how they have to believe, what they need to believe. And it was a rejection of Washington and how the politics is played there. It was a rejection of the gridlock. And so I think that you're having someone come completely from the outside who's not loyal necessarily to either party. I mean, it's Trumpism at its best. And he is not going to play the politics the way it's been normally played.
No, nobody's asking him to play politics the way it's been played, because it hasn't been played very well in a long time.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's absolutely true. However, his conduct, I don't call it a new form of being president, or he's transforming the president. He's degrading the White House. Let's just call it what it is. He's not telling the truth. I could spend hours up here talking about the issues where he's blatantly not told the truth. Okay? That's not conduct that anybody around here would excuse. You don't accept it with your 5 girls. I don't accept it with my 2 kids. So why do we want to accept that as president as some sort of, well, he's just different? So that's not fair. Sure, Obama didn't reach out to Republicans, and the big problem we have with Obamacare is that it was pushed through without Republican support.
Right.
And one of the big problems we're going to have now, conversely, is that the Republicans are going to try to push through the reform of it without Democratic support. Neither side of that is the right approach. But we should hold the president to a higher standard, not to a lower standard just because he's odd.
Well,
And I just want to, as the non-Republican on the panel, I don't want to dwell on the past, but when it came to the stimulus bill, which was one of the first major legislative initiatives from Barack Obama, he did reach out to Republicans. He included a big tax cut when Democrats wanted it to be more in terms of infrastructure spending. He tried to work with a gang of 4, 8, whatever it was, on the health care bill, and then they ran away from him. He worked
you're talking
really
about the immigration bill.
No, that was immigration later.
Right.
But on the health care bill with Susan Collins and Olympia Snow, these may not have worked, they may not have been as successful, but as of now, these were greater initiatives than what we see Trump doing on repeal, replace, the executive order, and everything else. So I think you can go back and look at that, but I'd like to see if we can move ahead here and sort of ask this question now. Donald Trump, when he ran in the primaries, was derided by many conservatives. Rick Perry called him a cancer on conservatism. He now works for the man. Marco Rubio called him a con man. And again, you had intellectuals and pundits on the right, from Bill Kristol and others, saying he's not conservative. We will talk about the issues perhaps. But my question now is, as we look ahead, and the future of the Republican Party and the future of the conservative movement hasn't always been the same, but it's often been intertwined. But so now, is it fair to say that the conservative movement is the Trump movement and the Republican Party is the Trump Party?
To a certain extent, I think that the conservative movement right now, I think, is a bit divided into, everything seems to be divided into 2 camps. The conservative purist, which would be like the Jonah Goldbergs from National Review, put Bill Kristol in that camp as well, where there is...
Who's a leading neoconservative
right.
who edits the Weekly Standard.
That's right. So Stephen Hayes, also with the Weekly Standard, they were pretty much part of the Never Trump world in terms of saying Trump is not a conservative, he is not an acceptable alternative, but we would make the argument, those of us who deal in the grassroots world make the argument of saying, well, compared to Hillary Clinton, who are you going to have more of an influence on in terms of policy, a Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? Obviously, when Donald Trump chose Mike Pence as a vice presidential, his candidate, it was a clear indication that was sent to the conservative movement that he wanted to have this serious outreach to conservatives. And then I think you had, when he gave out the list of conservatives for the Supreme Court nominations, another sort of outreach to conservatives as well, that he was serious in terms of saying, I'm willing to listen, I want you all to be part of my campaign. So I think you still will have the purists in terms of the conservatives who are, and the conservative movement in general, that are keeping tabs on what the president is doing. So far when it comes to the Supreme Court nominations, so far when it comes to tax reform, on Obama repeal and replacement, there's a lot of issues there that conservatives don't like. They're pleased. They're seeing, for example, on the pro-life issue, they're pleased, they like the direction that he's taking this. But again, when you talk about infrastructure spending, something that's very popular with Democrats, conservatives get nervous when it's all this government spending. So I think you're going to see that conservatives will still hold the president accountable. It's not just you're all in, but I think where he did make the right step was on definitely the Supreme Court nomination on Gorsuch, which has been a very...
And on foreign policy issues, particularly going easy on Putin, on trade issues,
Yeah.
I mean, these have been
Yeah,
sort
those
of
are
the
two issues.
bedrock,
Right.
and even on issues of the debt and deficit spending. You mentioned
Yeah.
infrastructure. We see, the initial reviews of the House, Obamacare substitute would actually create more deficit and other things too. He has shown no sort of loyalty, and if you looked at his campaign promises, between the tax plan and his and spending, he does nothing for the national debt except expand it, though he railed against it.
This is where I think you have to understand the breakup of the conservative movement, or how the conservative movement is. It's Ronald Reagan explained it perfectly in the three-legged stool, which is the social conservatives, the fiscal conservatives, and then the neocons. So
National security,
strong, hawkish, more like a Senator Marco Rubio, for example, or like a Lindsey Graham. So it doesn't mean. So you could be a conservative that's mostly a social conservative. So for the evangelical Christians, for the more of the conservative Catholics, they're going to be focused on the pro-life issues, on the family issues, and then you have the neocons, again going back to like a Senator Marco Rubio, for example, more hawkish. They will not be necessarily happy with the direction that President Trump is going, but they are going to be happy with the fact that they don't want us negotiating with Iran. They don't like the Iran nuclear deal, and they want us to get out of there. Then you have the free traders, and so those individuals will not be happy with the trade restrictions. So there will be parts that they will like of his agenda. There will be parts that they won't like of his agenda.
Well,
You do Republicans. I did the conservatives.
yeah, she should work for the president.
I think she'd be better than some people we've seen.
She would be better
Although I'm
than all
not
of
sure.
them.
I like Mercedes, so I wouldn't wish that upon her.
I'm not gonna go work
She has
for the
more
president.
focus than the president. On Republicans, and yes, they're intertwined, obviously. There wouldn't be the conservative movement now without the Republican Party and vice versa. They're totally intertwined completely. Just on the conservative side, though, a little bit, we don't know where we're going to be on tax reform. It's just been introduced. I have a sense that it's being gobbled up by special interests as we speak, which is the way Washington works. And yes, the Supreme Court pick is a good pick, and his list was a good list during the campaign. And the reach out to Mike Pence, I guess, made sense. But he was also in the middle putting together a minimum winning coalition and battening down the Republican opposition on his right flank. So it made sense that he did those things. I'm not sure he's actually committed to any of them in the long term. On the Republican side, his polling numbers now run about 38 to 40%. And why do I bring up polling numbers? Because in Washington, among Republican office holders, there's no interest like self-interest. And as long as his numbers hold somewhat stable in the 40 to 45% mark, which is not a good place for a new president, but it is what it is, he'll be fine. But there is nervousness. If this Russian investigation picks up steam, if there is a special prosecutor, and those are two big ifs, if his numbers fall below 38%, where you start losing people who didn't really want to support him but couldn't vote for Secretary Clinton, then you're going to start seeing Republicans, both in Washington and around the country, to start separating themselves from him. But again, we're only 6 weeks or 5 weeks into an administration, so it's hard to say that. He is the leader of our party. It pains me to say that, but he is the leader of our party. We are handcuffed to his success or failure at the moment. The future of the party, ultimately, we're going to talk about that, hopefully. We're going to have to take the handcuffs off, because there's no future to our party growing in the demographic groups that we have to grow in and in the states where we have to grow if we're linked to Donald Trump. permanently.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because very famously, after the 2012 election, a fellow named Reince Priebus,
The autopsy.
did what he called a very bad choice of words, the autopsy, which was basically a post-election review about why the Republican Party had lost the last two elections and had not, fared that well in the electoral vote
Right.
for, 5, 6, 8, 7, whatever cycles. And he came down to what a lot of people had concluded before the autopsy, that the party did not seem to be welcoming to American voters of Latino heritage, and that it was also because of maybe social conservative issues, but also the way that Republicans spoke about these issues, putting off women voters, and talked all about how the party had to address these, otherwise it was dead in the long run. Come 2016, Donald Trump, threw those rules out and really narrowed in on white working class men, many who were older and who were having trouble, have been having trouble economically, not under Obama per se, but for the last 20, 30 years, and talked about going back to a greater age. Whenever, he never gave us a time frame when America was great when compared to
Ronald Reagan. Sorry.
Well, he never said that.
He opposed Ronald Reagan, actually.
And at the same time, he said many things that were offensive to Latino voters. He said many things that were offensive to women, and whether he was caught on tape boasting about sexual assaulting women, or what he said about women who made those charges afterward. He went after Kaiser Khan in a way that was certainly, not helpful if you're trying to, attract Muslim voters, not a big block, admittedly, but did basically everything that Reince Priebus had said, don't do. And he threaded the needle. I like to think of this as if when you watch football and they do the kickoff, the ball bounces and tends to bounce in different directions. But every once in a while, you do a kickoff and the ball bounces straight. It keeps going the same direction over and over again and ends up going out of the end zone. And a lot of things came together for him like that. So he avoided this demographic trap that seemed to be waiting for the Republicans. You just mentioned this, but I'll go to you first. Do you think,
As a woman Latina, this is going to be great.
yes, do you think this, these demographics will pose a problem, that this maybe was sort of the last hurrah for trying to bring out this voting group? And I would argue, I know you won't agree, that there was racist language involved in this, and that his whole rise to prominence as a conservative leader was based on the racist birther conspiracy theory that he pushed. But putting that aside, just that bloc did vote for him, and he didn't make really efforts to reach out elsewhere. Can the Republican Party win with that strategy moving ahead?
These are such deep questions, David, and everything is so complicated, because I feel when you look at Florida, for example, I remember in the election they had seen about 500,000 new Hispanic voters who had signed up. So there was this big concern in Florida that there was no way that President Trump could win Florida. It was clear that there was definitely an energized effort on the part of the Democrats to sign up Hispanics down in Florida. What happened is in my community down in Miami, which is Cuban American, you had over 58% of Cubans voting for Donald Trump. They were completely opposed to President Obama and his Cuba policy. They felt betrayed by President Obama. And, you also had that generation of even like my sister who's, in her 30s, they were just not political, but they were just attracted to Trump because he was a successful businessman. He was going to bring change to Washington, and it was this excitement around Trump. And so I think that what those individuals, remember, there was a lot of Cubans who voted for President Obama back in 2008, 2012. They abandoned think about it. Reagan used to get 84% of the Cuban American vote. You're talking that we're down to 58% now for Donald Trump. And it worries me because I come from the Bush world where we used to be thrilled to get 45% of the Hispanic vote, and Donald Trump got 29, and they were cheering it on. And I was like, wait a second, we can't cheer this. This is not good enough. We need to do better. And so I think for the party, it's trying to figure out if it's becoming the worker class party, which is where they've brought in these a lot of those who were in the working class who voted for Obama 2008, 2012, then decided, you know what, I'm going to give this guy a try. Is that long-lasting? Is it a long-lasting relationship? No, because I think that these are mostly independent voters who could switch easily. So do the Republicans have to do, this has always been the case. John, we've talked about this every single election cycle since I can remember in reaching out to the Hispanic community. Absolutely. I just want to make one point. Donald Trump spent $0 on Spanish language television and radio. Zero. I remember in providing advice to the campaign that I was like, how are we not going to spend money in this area? And, I think the RNC spent maybe $250,000. That's nothing compared to millions of dollars that were spent by Hillary Clinton. Yet she failed to provide the enthusiasm. So you had not enough Hispanic voters going out to vote for her. Then you had not enough African Americans voting for her in key states. The enthusiasm was simply not there. I think it's very much driven by who is, going to John's point, the leader of the party. Could Trump replicate this 4 years from now? It's going to be very, very difficult unless he's able to bring people, unless we know we have a booming economy, he's able to really hone in on his agenda where it's 3% growth in the economy. People are feeling it in their wallets, and families are saying, my life is better today than it was 4 or 5 years ago.
Right now, we have headlines about the Trump administration wanting to separate parents from 7-year-olds when they round them up at the border, and this is
and look, this is just so you know, my background is in Hispanic media, and this is my area, and I think we were very much part of, under the Bush world, trying to push forward comprehensive immigration reform. One of the shocking things, which I thought was interesting, is the date of the joint session of Congress, that he said he wanted to talk bipartisanship on immigration reform. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
That seemed to be just a ruse, actually.
There were stories afterwards that was called a misdirection from people in the White House. That's their phrase. So that seemed to be kind of some of a cynical
I think it came from him.
Well, okay, well, he said it was a misdirection. He was the guy who.
Well, he said it in his speech, so I'm not.
No, he didn't say this.
No, he didn't.
So it was very much, I think, on the immigration reform. When it comes to Hispanics, immigration is a very important issue. It's not the most important one. You look at the Pew Research, it's going to show you that economics, jobs, education are the key issues. Now, on immigration, do we have to solve the problem? Absolutely. Do we have to enforce the law? Yes. Do you find that the majority of Hispanics support border security? Absolutely, they do. But it's
right. There's nobody who doesn't support border security.
There you go.
Or
enforcing the law on immigration, right?
The issue is also how you do it, and whether you're rushing into schools and taking parents away from kids, or the whole way you go about doing it sends a message. And this has only been going on for 6 weeks. I can only imagine if this becomes the norm over the course of
the problem is that it's because of the lack of immigration reform that we have not had for decades that we've ended up in the situation that we're in. Right? And so there needs to be a resolution.
And Trump kind of ran against the Gang of Eight immigration reform. He chided Marco Rubio for being part of it. So right now, he has, I don't think he's read the autopsy. I don't think he cares about the autopsy, and he seems to be speaking to a very small part of the base that is not in agreement with you. But I want to get John.
Look, I'm just going to say it's not possible to replicate this, nor should we. Nor should we want to replicate this victory. He won. If the election had been on Wednesday or on Monday or on Saturday, he probably would have lost. It was one of those 1 in 100,000 thread the toxic stew needle that he was able to win this election. Hillary Clinton ran a non-inspiring, apparatchik campaign. There was nothing that she said that inspired these young people or people that I've met around the country. And then she had the distractions of Comey and whatever happened with the Russians, you can't qualitatively say one thing or the other. 77,000 votes in 3 major states cost the election. He lost the popular vote. Okay, let's not kid ourselves about this, okay, at all. We can't replicate this. 2 years from now, the country will be 2% less white, just demographically. And while the Cuban American vote has gone from 84, 86% for President Reagan down to the high 50s for President Trump, the Mexican American vote, the Central American vote that's in the United States now, the votes from the Caribbean basin, et cetera, those are trending much more against us. Millennial voters are trending against us. First-time voters are trending against us. Young women are trending against us. I can go on and on and on. Asian Americans who voted in big numbers for President Reagan are trending against us in big numbers. It's not sustainable. And at the end of the day, policy is politics. We can't ignore the concerns of average Americans like we have done. And I could go through a litany of policy issues that no reason to get into debate about all of them tonight. But we have turned our back or have been cynical about solving them with bumper sticker slogans and not been responsible as a party. Not so much as a conservative movement, but as a party. And that's going to catch up with us. We have to start going to the marketplace of other demographic groups and offering our hand and saying, what are your concerns? Here are conservative or center-right solutions to your concerns, and that we care. But right now, all they hear is our leader of our party calling them names, whole groups of people, or a judge of Hispanic origin, or a Gold Star father who happens to be Muslim being denigrated by the leader of our party. And that is not sustainable.
Well, my question is an obvious one then, John. As long as he is the leader of your party, and I think we can all agree, it's not a political point, that when it comes to the bully pulpit, he tops them all in terms of controlling
it's on
the microphone.
steroids, yeah.
Controlling the microphone, the megaphone, whatever you want to call it. So as long as he's in that position, and I'll accept your view that there's not going to be much change in how he behaves.
No.
Will there ever be a chance for other Republicans to present to potential Republican voters a different view? I mean, this brings us a little bit into what's going to happen in 2018 when Republicans will be on the ballot and he won't be. But as long as he's there, is there a way to...
Well, it's hard for others
be
to
a
break
Republican
through.
who's not with a different message?
Yeah, it's hard. You got to have some standing. Senator McCain has the standing to do that, and he breaks through.
John, come on.
He breaks through, particularly on foreign policy issues and on immigration issues and tone, quite frankly. But Ben Sass, Jeff Flake, we have a lot of good young. We have a deep bench actually, but you can't compete with the president, particularly a president like this who kind of dominates the landscape. So it's going to be difficult to get other voices through.
So why did you laugh when you
I'm
said John
sorry,
McCain?
John. Let me just, I think that it's important to understand a little bit of the dynamics of the Republican Party. And John, I'd love to get your insight on it as well. And I think because there's a sense of what I call the country club Republicans where
Like the people hang out at Mar-a-Lago?
No, the people who hang out in Washington in the wonderful, nice, dinners at Capitol Grill and all those places.
At the Trump Hotel.
Okay, you got to remember that those are the. Are you hanging out at Trump Hotel too?
Only for reporting purposes.
There you go.
You won't believe what you can see at the
But
Trump
what I'm
Hotel
saying
upstairs.
is it's the sense of the disconnect. It was the sort of the Ryans, the McConnells, where it's where you had the rebellious Republicans almost say, I can't be part of that, and decide to go over with a Trump. I think actually John Kasich was a perfect example of someone who was able to understand the grassroots, understand the people and what was happening at the local levels. I think there has been a disconnect between the Republican establishment and the leaders and what's happening in the grassroots level. And so I feel that it's important, I think, to make that distinction.
Well, let me,
And so I think that's why there was the rejection of like a Marco Rubio and a rejection of these Washington types because of the fact that they're like, we need some, you know.
look, the whole Tea Party came about because we collectively as Republicans, said, put us in power, we're going to balance the budget,
Yeah.
we're going to restrain
Repeal
government,
Obama,
and what did
they
we
did
do?
nothing.
We had the president,
That's right.
we had Congress, and what did we do? We
Yeah.
put 2 wars on a credit card, we have a new entitlement bill that we couldn't pay for. The Tea Party came basically because of our inaction. And then what did we tell the Tea Party? We're going to repeal Obamacare, even though President Obama was down at the White House. We weren't going to repeal anything.
Well, and we
And
didn't have
so-
enough votes. I mean, like they sold this bag of, this, you know.
Not only do we have the
bag of
votes, he
goods
also
to the
could veto anything we
Republicans, And
do.
they're like, wait a second, you didn't fight against Obama. You let him, you know, you said you were going to repeal Obamacare. Well, you can't. Well, technically, you really can't because you need 60 senators
Yeah.
to do so. I mean, so I think there was definitely the sense that they didn't get anything done in Congress, and we're done
Yeah.
with you.
And that's going to, and now look, today, we have a health care bill that's dead on arrival.
Right.
And we're going to end up with the bill that we've had, with the legislation that we've had for another year, probably, at least, would be my guess.
So do you think that Republicans, as we move up to the 2018 elections on the House and Senate side, and there are, luckily for Republicans, many more Democrats up on the Senate in 2018 than Republicans, but that they should fully identify with Trump and the approach he had towards winning in 2016?
But
And
I think each district is different, and each Senate race is going to be different. And I think you look at the map right now, John, it favors Republicans. It's going to depend how much they can get done from now to next year and have to be highly successful in their legislative agenda. So that means, will the transition of going from Obamacare to a Ryan/Trump care, will it be an effective transition? Or are you going to have as we're seeing it play out in these congressional districts, these protesters coming out in these town halls and, making known their views? I mean, what I find is that the average American, they don't like uncertainty. They don't like change. And we're going to be changing from this Obamacare to this next whatever version it's going to be. And the thing is, Trump right now and the Republicans, they have political capital. Their political capital will run out by ending of this year. Mm-hmm. So it really is going to depend on the impact. If they get through an Obamacare that is, I don't want to say flawless because I think that's almost impossible to do. If they get through a tax reform, and if you see the economy and jobs really coming back to America and the economy booming, I think there's a possibility. But as history shows, midterm elections, it always goes against the party in power.
Yeah.
Would you be happy if Trump ends up finding a way to work with congressional Republicans to pass a replacement bill and to enact some form of tax reform? Would you?
Yeah, look, as Governor Kasich said 2 weeks ago, he's the pilot of the plane. You want the plane to land safely. Okay? Yes. Now, I added on to that. That doesn't mean you want the same pilot to fly the next leg of the trip, but of course we want him to be successful, and we need meaningful tax reform for all kinds of reasons. One for fairness and one for economic growth, and of course, but I don't anticipate that happening. I see more likely him cutting deals with Chuck Schumer, et cetera, on an infrastructure bill more quickly than I see tax reform coming down the pike.
And what would you be telling if you were working for a Republican, one of the few who are up for re-election in 2018, about how they should be positioning themselves vis-a-vis Trump?
Look,
Mercedes
said this right. Every race is different. Now, unfortunately, our most vulnerable Republicans in the House, I'll just talk about the House first, are going to be the ones that are going to be most distant from the president. But they're going to pay the biggest price for his positions and his conduct. They're already positioning themselves away from him, but they're in danger because their districts by nature are more equivocal. The Senate race, every Senate race will be different. Now the headwinds, I'm not anticipating a big economic upturn between now and 2018. I think the headwinds historically are going to be what they are against us. And if the president's approval ratings are what they are now or even lower, it's going to be difficult. But the map does work in our favor, so we could have a net gain and still have a bad cycle because we didn't pick up as much as we should. The House, however, we could lose nominal control of the House if we're not careful. And so Paul and the leadership there need to really score some victories that could be seen as not victories for the party, but victories for the country. And I think that's really vital. There's too much talk about this is good for the Republican Party. What is good for the country? If it's good for the country, it will be automatically good for your party.
Well, let me ask you, as someone who believes that Trump is not a stable leader and could do things that might be dangerous, would you not want to see one of the two houses of Congress have the ability to keep him in check?
Well, I don't really have a lot of faith in Nancy Pelosi.
I was going to say, John McCain keeps him in check. I don't know
Well,
what you're talking
just in terms of having
He
decent...
has his own people within his own party.
Well, just in terms of having decent investigations, we see, on the financial conflicts of interest with Jason Chaffetz, he won't look into that. Devin Nunes on the House Intelligence Committee, keeps complaining about the investigation that he's supposed to be in charge of.
Well, look,
so,
look,
on those matters, I know you care about these issues.
I do. Look, and I think ultimately public pressure will cause them to do the right thing. I personally support a special prosecutor. I personally support a select committee in Congress to look into this because an attack on any political party, an attack is an attack on our democracy. And there is nothing more vital than the defense of our democracy. I don't care who you are. And so I take great offense that we seem to be dragging our feet on that. Having said that, I'm not ready to turn the keys back over to Speaker Pelosi because I don't have faith that will be run any better or anything else.
Well, it's good to know you're still a Republican. Let me ask sort of a big picture question, then we're going to go to questions. So start thinking of questions now. The Republican Party and the conservative movement used to like to identify themselves above all with Ronald Reagan and with Reaganism. And they used to say that, that there was an optimism to Reaganism, the shining city on the hill, and a loyalty that went all the way back to Goldwater days, to bedrock conservative principles on all three legs of the stool. All three legs. He wasn't a buffet for Ronald Reagan. He was, when he sat on that stool, there was no tipping.
Right, it was his stool.
It was his stool, and
Trump might have another stool.
well, that's my question.
Yeah.
As we move to a Trump Republican Party or Conservative Party, is it darker? Is it meaner? Is it less ideologically
Pure.
coherent, internally coherent? You talk about, he's hawkish in some ways, he's not hawkish in other ways, and he goes back and forth on the same issue. Ask him about Syria 3 times and you'll get 5 different answers. Reagan, it was really not hard to figure out where he and the people who supported him would land. And now, I watch CPAC, and they talk about Ronald Reagan and they talk about Trump. Has, Trump pushed, pulled, nudged the Republican Party and the conservative movement into just a much different place than where Reagan had it?
We have to separate what Donald Trump stands for and how he conducts himself from the rest of the party. He's the leader of our party because he's the president of the United States right now. But his conduct so far of foreign policy has been erratic and dangerous. Ronald Reagan was able, and then President Bush, who succeeded him, they were firm. Not only did our allies know what we were doing, our opponents did. Okay, so the world was a more stable place, ultimately led to the downfall of the Soviet Empire. And on domestic policy, the same thing. Here we have a president who is either a blank slate, which I get because he comes from the business world, a blank slate, and he kind of drifts around on policy, or he's erratic based on his mood swings or what he saw on Tucker or Fox and Friends in the morning or read on a website. That's not how we can conduct national security policy because real lives are at stake, and it's not a laughing matter. There are going to be people who will no longer be alive or no longer be free a year from now because of the actions of this president in other countries. That is not something that we should take lightly. And that's not something Ronald Reagan or the people who knew Ronald Reagan appreciate when people try to co-join this guy with President Reagan.
Well, I think Mattis and Tillerson and
Tillerson.
the national security, what?
Go out, and I'm curious what
No, I mean,
the head
I
of
just think that he's
ExxonMobil is
surrounding
doing.
himself with individuals who will provide, foreign policy advice to him. I mean, I do think he has decided he's going to position
We just had
himself.
a
We've
security
gone from, like, a
conference in
president-
Munich where we sent the vice president, the secretary of defense.
Right,
They
and
said
then
what they
happened?
said that
John
you're.
McCain went and started bashing the
No,
United States of America.
No,
and
actually,
this
that's not what
presidency.
happened. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
they, and they
let-
actually said what John McCain was saying, and who undercut them, but the president of the United States. And
It was
as
John
No, explain.
McCain.
And as Governor
I'll
Casey-
give you'll get a chance. Let's explain, because not everyone followed this. Explain how you saw what happened there. And then
well, there was an annual security conference in Munich where originally it was just our NATO allies would come, but now it's grown. The Russians come, and the Iranians come, and the Chinese come, and it's kind of ridiculous at this stage. But you have all the security leaders of the different countries that come and speak, and it's a chance for us to meet with our allies. It's a chance for us to interface with people who are neutral, and it's a chance to interface with our potential and real adversaries. John McCain has been going for 30 years and has led that conference and led the American delegation to that conference this year. Governor Kasich went as a delegate at Senator McCain's request. So obviously we saw a lot of firsthand knowledge, and we talked to a lot of Europeans there who were like distressed with what they're hearing out of this administration. And it's not what they're hearing out of Mattis. They're not hearing anything out of Mr. Tillerson, who we need to find where he is. And they're distressed about what they're hearing from the president. And I know Governor Kasich told him when he got back, Mr. President, you can send Mike Pence there all you want, and you can send General Mattis there, but our allies need to hear from you, and everyone needs to speak with the same voice. That's not a criticism. That's a fact. And he needs to, again, getting back to my point about being presidential, he needs to step up and understand that words matter. Unfortunately, tweets matter now, and that he has to accept responsibility for this. He speaks for it, not Pence, not Mattis, not Rex Tillerson. He has to set the tone. So I don't really think that's criticism.
No, I agree with you on that, but
Yeah.
I do believe that when John McCain went over to Munich and made the comments being critical of the president, I mean, that is not what we need. I don't think it's helpful in.
No, I think you need to reread his speech. What he said
Okay.
was, do not lose faith in the American people, that we will stand with you if you're in Ukraine. We will stand with you if you're in the Baltics. We will stand with you against Vladimir Putin. Now, you may take that as criticism
No,
of
there
Donald
was
Trump.
more to that speech.
No,
that
there
was
actually
direct-
wasn't.
There was.
No, I'll
Well,
refer everyone to
one
it.
big issue, though, is when John McCain says that, whether it's accurate, I'm not saying true or not, he's speaking from his perspective,
Yeah.
and we've seen from the president
But if
statements.
you're representing the American delegation,
But to
You're
speak with the
representing the country.
but to speak with the substance, we've seen from the president, back and forth on NATO, back and forth on Ukraine. Of course, it's quite well known, that he's yet to say one critical thing about Putin, who is, a repressive thug on a good day.
He did attack
And,
Nordstrom.
He has attacked Nordstrom and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Rosie O'Donnell, and the list goes on and on. And you can address John's big point here, but one thing that just really puzzles me, is when when it comes to the foreign policy, national security leg of the triad. How conservatives who support Trump, what they think about his approach to Russia. Because to me, this is why it joins John and I. I'm not a hawk.
Right.
And I've never, I've always believed that, throughout the Cold War, we should try to find ways to lessen tensions and to find areas where we can work together, as we did on non-proliferation with Russia and on the Iran sanctions. But at the same time, I recognize that Putin has basically declared war on liberal democracies throughout Europe and America. And back at home, he's, people like us who disagree with him would have to flee or fear for our lives. And yet Donald Trump, again and again and again, it's just uncanny, cannot say a negative word about him, cannot talk about the repression in Russia, the deaths of journalists and critics of Putin, and cannot say anything about Russia meddling, not in the United States, in Western Europe and elsewhere. For me, it's mind-boggling.
Well, and he should,
so,
Nikki Haley in the United Nations made comments that were critical.
yeah, but he can't.
What I'm saying
Tillerson
is he
can.
should.
But my question is,
take what Nikki Haley said. Now,
no, but my question is, what do you think about why he
I
can't?
spoke to a former Bush national security official.
An anonymous source.
No, I don't have that. Well,
I'm just teasing.
And I asked, because I did ask. I was like, what should we do with Russia? And he said, here's the deal. When you have senators, they're going to have a certain approach in calling, a foreign leader a thug, making all these comments. That understandable. With the President of the United States, he is in a position right now where it would be to the benefit of the United States and Russia to try, and I don't want to even use the word reset because Hillary used the word reset, but how do you have a better relationship with Russia? And it can't start on the footing of the thug comment and the other comment. It has to start with building that relationship.
God, you guys spent 8 years calling Obama feckless, and
But actually,
he tried
Obama
hard,
called
and he
a schoolyard bully. There was that. What I'm saying is that.
And what would Ronald Reagan think? What would Ronald Reagan say?
There's one thing that Vladimir Putin understands. First off, he understands a reset as an opportunity for him to steal some more over here. Okay, that's one. Two, he understands strength and firmness. That's the only thing he understands. Right. And this new code word that some conservatives are saying, oh, we just need to kind of work with Putin. Trump's a businessman; he can cut a good deal with him.
I don't think you can cut a good deal.
No, you can't.
I think there's nothing.
And meanwhile, the chief strategist in the White House has been meeting with alt-right and white supremacists and leaders in Europe who are running against our allies, some of whom are funded by Putin, is also sending a signal that's totally inappropriate. Look, we need to hear from the president that he's going to stand with our NATO allies, he's going to stand with the EU, and he's going to stand with American. We need to have a foreign policy based on values, not based on cutting the best deal possible.
Well, he has made those comments on the NATO allies. It's just that you all decide to sparse it the way you want to sparse it. But, he has made those comments of sticking with the NATO allies. Look at his speech.
Well,
point it to me.
Okay.
Well, okay.
I can have my phone.
When he read his speech, he has. At other times, he hasn't. So let's go to some questions.
When he reads his speech, he's presidential.
Yes. Let's go to some questions. There's a microphone there. Microphone there. I did say I had a preference for students. If we get through some students and other people want to join, please do so. And I don't know, tell us your name and maybe where you're from, and let's hear your question. We'll start over here. Is the mic on?
Hello?
Yeah?
Hello?
That works.
It works?
Speak right into
My
it.
name is Greer. I'm from Baltimore. And my question is twofold for Ms. Schlapp. You talked about how divided our country is and how there's sort of like two sections of it that Trump's talking to. They hear one section of what he says. We hear something else. And I was wondering, on our side, what we should be doing to bridge that gap. And on your side, for some of the things that you support, how we can bridge that gap when the president constantly walks into non-policy related controversial matters, like attacking the president this past weekend, and objectively lies, like Mr. Corn was saying. And in terms of like Fox News, like I check it, every morning, and I rarely see any
Just
overlap.
like the president.
Yeah, I rarely see any overlap between them, and I read the Times as well. There's almost no overlap between the headlines. So aren't those things helping to create the alternate reality that is hurting the country? And thank you very much for
That's a great question. No, I think, obviously, as John has mentioned, it starts from the top. I think that there is this complete sense of, and I'm glad you're watching Fox once in a while, that you're able to get as much news as you can from different outlets and see where what people are thinking on the right, on the left. I think it's just a helpful thing to do in general. I think to the divide, I think part of it is the dialogue and the conversation. I think, we've been on television debating, on live television, it could be tough, but when you're off TV, the reality is that you really try to have the discussions on how can we find common ground? So like after the presidential election, the first person I always call after any sort of election is my mentor, who actually now is retired but worked at the university that I went to, and he's a Democrat, and I'm a conservative. And we always talk about where can we find the common ground in terms of policy. So I think you're finding that one thing with President Trump is that since he's not an ideologue, he's not a pure conservative, he's not a pure liberal, he is going to want to work with different sides of the aisle. Would it help that he could control a bit the tweeting and not go with his gut reaction and realize that, as John says, words matter? I think it would be incredibly beneficial for him to do that, but I don't control the president, and he is who he is. I mean, it's how he wants to communicate and not necessarily use the media, which in a lot of ways really represent him as like an evil guy. And anyone who's had personal contact with him will tell you he's not. Like, he's not there. Like, this whole idea that he wants to be a dictator or he's authoritarian. It's like when you meet him, he says it all the time. He's focused on, what do I need to do to grow the economy? What do I need to do to get things done? So if he would just stick to that and his agenda,
But why is he up at
could be
6 in,
incredibly
why is he up at 6 in the morning
I know, 'cause
attacking
well,
Arnold
would be my
Schwarzenegger?
life. I would
You
not
know,
be
I
up
mean,
that.
he's not, but he's not. I mean, the sense you get, is that he's not really focused on the policy stuff.
He works
You know,
all the time, David. He
Well,
works.
he came
I mean,
out and
that's the
spent
problem.
90
He
minutes
just spends
berating
his
the
whole
press at his only big press conference so far in his presidency. That way, he didn't come out to talk about policy. It's like, how come you're not being fair to me? How come you're not doing this? How come he sends messages to Sean Spicer while he's doing the briefing saying, hit him harder? I mean, it seems that he is not always
He
focused.
does not look, and you know this, he does not want, he has no interest in being friends with the press. And I mean,
It's not about being friends.
No, for him, and in past press secretaries, there are normally, and I mean, Dana Perino is a friend of mine. I mean, I know Ari Fleischer. These are individuals who had actually very healthy relationships with the press. And there has created this sense of hostility between the press and creating this division. For the press to be psychoanalyzing itself for like days on end when Donald Trump called them enemy of the American people, and they kept psychoanalyzing themselves. Well, why are we the enemy? I mean, they were spinning their talking about day after day.
Why did he say that? I mean, when the president of the United States calls anyone or anything an enemy of the American people, I mean,
well, because he feels that it's not an independent press, and is it?
Well, independent? It's surely independent.
As opposed to Breitbart?
It is independent free. How is it not free?
No,
People are free to report what they want and how they see it, whether you're at the New York Times, the Washington Post, he may not like what they report,
right,
but no one's telling them
and he's
what
free to criticize them.
Yeah, but to call someone the enemy, not to say they're wrong or they're misguided, which is certainly fair to do, but to call them the enemy of the American people? Do you believe that? Do you believe that CNN is the enemy of the American people?
No, I don't.
Okay, do you think a
But
president
that's my
should be,
opinion.
you talk about being divisive, what could be more divisive than a statement like that? I mean, you can't, you can't call for coming together, and we all want to see this country be less divisive, and then give a pass to someone in authority who creates that division with his tweets and his words without any regard, it seems, for consequences. Enough for my speech.
No,
Do you want to say anything?
Oh, no, you said it very well.
Well, let's go over there for another question. Yeah, speak right into it.
So I want to ask about the extent to which you think the strategies being pursued, not just by the Republicans, but also by the Democrats, have become regional in that a lot of the de facto leaders of each party, like to say the Republicans, Chairwoman McDaniel and the Speaker and the Vice President and the Chief of Staff are all from the Midwest, and the de facto leaders of the Democratic Party like Schumer and Warren and Booker and Sanders are all from the Northeast, and how that's going to play out geopolitically moving forward when some of the areas that are sort of ripe for the taking are not really being responded to in terms of people from those places being elevated to the forefront of the discussion, how that's going to work out.
Yeah, well, on the...
Governor Kasich, too, also from the Midwest.
Yeah. Well, on the Democratic side, look, they're going to be they won't have a leader of the party until they have a new standard bearer running for president in 2020. So we don't, and they'll have 18, 20 people running for that position. So who knows what that will be. Look, both parties are in search of identity, quite frankly. We stumbled upon Mr. Trump, and he was able to win. Hillary Clinton was, as I said earlier, was like an apparatchik. She moved around to try to beat back Senator Sanders. You know, you had a 72 or 73-year-old socialist who wasn't even a member of the Democratic Party who almost won their nomination and brought most of the energy to their primary battle. And then you had our situation. So I think both parties currently are still kind of searching for what they're going to be in the next, 10, 20, 30 years. But we won't see who the Democrats are or what they're going to be until they have their primary battle for president. I mean, that's how that kind of works. And on our side, we'll see what happens if this president serves out his term, or if he runs for re-election, or is president for 8 years, or what. We don't know. But we can't really do much about our situation until it's the post-Trump world. That's my view, at least.
Do you think it'll be a post-Trump world, or will it just be the Trump world? Is that the identity that the party has found that will stick around for a while?
Well, I think, yes, I think for now it will. Does it mean that it's going to, it's going to be the party for the next, 14, 20 years? Leaders do shape the parties. So is it bringing in more white working class individuals into the party? Maybe so, but do you want to make sure that you're also, it's always, they talk about the Big Tent, bringing in women, bringing in Hispanics, African Americans. I mean, one of the things that President Trump is focused on is his outreach in terms of helping build inner cities, and it's something that I think Republicans have done a terrible job of even talking about. He doesn't have a problem going to talk to African American leaders and their communities, something that Republicans, again, shied away from for a long time.
He didn't do that much of it during the campaign. There was months and months went by when people asked him to do that. And he did do it a couple of times.
But Republicans, for the most part, do it.
Right.
I don't think they do enough. They just give up the African American vote to Democrats. So will there, what I think is the case study to watch next is the state of Texas, which is a growing Hispanic population. I mean, John lives there. And what does it mean in terms of, when you saw on the map, there was a point that it wasn't Trump, it wasn't Hillary. Are those changing demographics going to be very much telling of where the Republican needs to go, which Republican Party needs to go, which was, right now it's a governor, Republican governor, Abbott, who's there, and John Cornyn, who they have very high favorabilities with the Hispanic community. So that's the trend that you want to be seeing.
And Senator Cruz, who does not.
Yeah. Well, and Julianne Castro will be running against him.
I don't think
Likely.
so.
You don't think he's going to run against him?
Ooh,
Interesting.
Okay.
Hi, thank you both for coming. My name's Ethan. I'm a sophomore here. I had a question about the comparison that Mr. Cornyn's making before between Trump and the Reagan administration, and I really don't see, I'd love to get Ms. Schlapp's opinion on this, how you can make that comparison given the Reagan approach of the 80s. Reagan and Margaret Thatcher had a very internationalist approach, be an active player in world politics. And what we see from the Trump administration and his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, is a lot of economic nationalism. And I was at CPAC with you and your husband last week, and I heard President Trump talk about how he wanted to build pipes made out of pipes that were that came just from American companies, and that we want to create all our products here. And that is just a drastically different worldview from the Reagan approach of the 80s to solving many of the problems of those times, bringing an end of communism in Europe. And I just would like to hear how you can see and reconcile both those different worldviews as both conservative.
Well, where you see them line up is on economic growth, on that they want the growth of America in terms of jobs. I mean,
Democrats would say that as well, though.
They would go about it in different ways. Is it less regulation, which is something that both Reagan and Trump would agree on? Would it be,
an infrastructure bill?
Tax reform. Remember, the last big tax reform was back in 1986. So you would find commonality in terms of tax reform as well. I think that Reagan spoke to the working class. It was the Reagan Democrats. And I think that Trump effectively did the same thing in these battleground states, in the Rust Belt states. So I think there is comparison in that area. I think in foreign policy, this is where we have a bit of the trying to figure out where Trump is going to go from a foreign policy standpoint. He seems like he's more of an isolationist, but then at the same time, which is not like Reagan, but at the same time, he wants to provide this peace through strength. They talk about it all the time in the Trump world, very much taken from a page out of Reagan's foreign policy position. So I think that while there's a lot of commonality, there's still not, there is some differences, because I do think that Trump is not going to be one to, want to be going into like Iraq, for example, in the case of like George W. Bush, or it's just not his style. But I think that the peace through strength, where America is strong, where you have military buildup, that's very much similar to what Reagan pushed.
In Facebook terms, it's complicated.
That's all I can do.
Did you want to talk about that?
No, I don't think there's a very fair comparison. Reagan, on his foreign policy, was kind of pre-neocon. He was not for intervening in world affairs necessarily, but he was for a firm response dealing with the Soviets at the time, and he continued what President Nixon did with his reapproachment with China. But you look on trade.
He was very focused on the ongoing battle with the evil empires.
He was.
The Soviet
Yeah,
Union,
totally.
which led to all sorts of things in Latin America and elsewhere, and supporting Marcos in the Philippines. It was a mixed bag.
I do forget that you work for Mother Jones.
Yeah, well, I want to make sure that it's not all, just the glorious Reagan days.
Yeah.
A lot of people who paid a price too. But anyway.
Yeah, but on the topic of like trade, there's a big differences with the Reagan administration. But again, those were different times. But NAFTA has been a success for this country. Okay, it's been a success for Canada, it's been a success for Mexico. The TPP would have been a success for this country, and it would have moved countries that are in the Chinese shadow away from China and more into the American orbit. Canceling that was a big mistake, not just for job creation here, but from a strategic national security point of view, because trade and national security have to go together. So I think there are major differences. There is not an ism behind Trump, because, again, he's either a blank slate or there's a mishmash of policy views. I don't think there's any one core.
Okay, I think this is the last question, right? So you get it. What? Two. So quick questions, quick answers.
So my name is Vivek, and before I get to my question, I just really want to thank you guys for being here, and I want to give you just a quick background about myself so you know where I'm coming from. So I'm from Dallas, Texas, arguably one of the most conservative states in the country, and I go to Brown, obviously one of the most liberal campuses on campus. So I understand both perspectives very well. My dad raised me to understand perspectives. That's one of my strengths. So my question is, after evaluating the facts, right? Not the alternative facts, but the facts. In taking Trump out of the picture, just looking at his actions and what he's done, what he said, a lot of the little things are bothering me, right? So not showing up to the national security intel briefings, taking away the Spanish part of the White House website, plus everything else, spinning the Russian communication during the campaign into, hey, it's a leak in national security, that's a threat. And I look at all these facts, and without trying to put my opinion in there, I'm not questioning values at all or anything, but I just want to understand, I want to learn why I should continue to support someone like that as the President of the United States, and what I can say to myself or other people to convince them to continue supporting him. Because before the election, I totally understood. If you're a Trump supporter, I get it, I respect that value. But right now, I'm confused as to why I should continue to think he's capable.
I think this is to you.
Yeah, I guess I'm the only one in the room left. I think Trump is a relationship builder in terms of, I think you're going to see he has brought in the moderate Democrats. He's willing to, he's a relationships guy. It's what he does well. It's where he's able to negotiate the deals, bring the jobs back. He's very much focused on pushing forward his agenda. And so I think if you believed in his campaign promises, that is where he's going. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other noise around it, which makes it very difficult. And I think he would be wise if he could really stay focused on what he can get done. Because I think one thing about Donald Trump is that he's a doer. And he really is, about how can I focus on helping the guy in Pennsylvania or the coal miners or it's where his heart is, and that's what he wants to do. But I do think he gets distracted would be the word, on things that I really don't think necessarily matter.
God, I hate hearing the guy who's in charge of nuclear weapons be described as someone who's easily distracted.
Well, Bill Clinton was distracted for other reasons, but...
Can we get Johnny here quickly, then we'll go to you.
Well, I just want to say, be involved,
Yeah.
speak out, participate, watch Fox, read the New York Times. Don't self-select your ecosystem to all you know is just what that you believe in. Be open-minded, make your own decisions. But if you're opposed to him, speak out and participate. If you're for him, speak out and participate. It's vital for our democracy that people get involved and stay involved no matter what your views are.
Okay, and this is our last question.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Naomi. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada / Tijuana, Mexico, and I'm a first year. So my question, well, I guess I'll add some more to it first. So a few days ago, the president met with a lot of leaders from historically black colleges, and a few days later, the same leaders that had met with him came out with official statements on their college websites talking about how they felt essentially played, and that nothing really came out of it except for an Instagram photo op. And you can go on their websites and not alternative fact. But anyway, so as a minority, I'm a low-income first-generation Mexican-American. I don't want an administration who looks at us to fill a quota. You said, oh, those numbers aren't good enough, but we're not numbers, we're human beings. So how do you think this administration will, if they do, actually reach out to us and actually care about us, if that's going to be putting people in the administration that represent us, not just white men? What are they going to do? What steps are they going to take beyond, a photo op?
Sure. I'm working closely with Alex Acosta, who's the Hispanic, who is now the Secretary of Labor nominee. I think that for one of his key advisors in the White House, Jenny Korn, was just picked as his special assistant and public liaison, someone who I worked very closely with during the campaign, who really has done an outstanding job reaching out to Hispanics in key battleground states in particular. I know that it's important. It's an important part of what they want to do in terms of reaching out to the Hispanic community. I think it's going to start with the jobs. I think that's where the key is for them in terms of helping small business owners, helping Hispanics in terms of school choice, which, for example, benefit minorities more so than in that case as well. So I think that it's going to be based a lot on his policy agenda. It's unfortunate because I know for him, that's an area that he's focusing on, and I know he's got good people in place that this is what they've done. This is what they did at the RNC, moved over to the White House. Helen Aguirre is also Hispanic. She's director of media affairs at the White House. These are people who I know and trust and work with, and they get it. And I know they're going to be very vocal voices, as well as Reince Priebus, who supported them in their efforts to get out the message to the Hispanic community.
Let me ask you, what are you looking for? What would convince you that this president and the people around him cared about you, your community, and your concerns?
Well, first, like you said, the little things, not calling out entire groups of people and having hateful rhetoric. That's definitely a big issue, but also policy. Like she said, representation, just having, a token Hispanic or a token African American really isn't enough. Going out, reaching into the local communities, asking us what we want. I haven't been seeing a lot of that, but hopefully it's something that they'll start considering.
We as a party need to do more of that anyway.
Yeah.
And I know both of us have been longtime advocates of that for a long time. So we as a party need to do it, and obviously this president or any president needs to do that as well.
It's a great note to end on. Let me just thank our panel. What a calm, deliberate conversation in this troubled time.